This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
So it is a joint boards meeting of the planning board. Mr. Chairman, would you like to open the planning board?
Good evening, everyone. Those in listening land out in Spectrum TV. Here to formally open tonight's planning board meeting. It's a joint meeting with the Select Board and the Housing Authority. And I have 4 members present from planning: Stephen Johnson, Dan LaValle, Mark Darnold, and myself, Paul Demon. And at this time, I'm officially opening our section of the meeting, and I would ask that the Housing Authority and Select Board follow suit.
Should I come to the podium yet? Oh, and it's listening to me. It looked at me. Okay. Is this thing on? So I would like to officially open the Housing Authority meeting. We just had one, which we closed, and now we're back open. I'm Sierra Simmons. I'm the chair. I'm also here with Janet Kane and our friend Dan LaValle over there on the planning board, who's also on the Housing Authority. So Housing Authority meeting has been opened.
All right, Chris Fowles, Chairman of the Select Board, calling to order the Select Board meeting as well. And we have a quorum with Stephen Johnson and Dan LaValle sitting on the Planning Board side as well. Cindy Palmer remoting in, and myself and John Lumber should be coming. So we have a quorum as well.
Great.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Paul, would you like to welcome folks and say a few words about the purpose of today's meeting?
I'd like to welcome Ken Comia and Kyle Fennell, both from Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, who are here tonight to assist in the presentation with the 40R district. And thank you for allowing time in your schedule to be here. And I welcome all those from the public that may be here, and our town administrator, Scott Zeebeck.
Great. Do you want to add anything, Madam Chair?
No, just glad that we were able to all get together. I think this is a topic that's come up somewhat in the past, and I'm looking forward to learning a whole lot more about it. I know both Sierra and Paul Fergal from the Planning Board had brought it to the attention of the Master Plan Committee when we last met, and we spent some time talking about it in terms of having a 40R overlay district and what that meant. And so I don't have the history about what happened in the past. I believe this has come before the town, or at least the Planning Board, sometime in the past. So looking forward to learning about that, and also glad to reconnect with Ken Comia in particular, who was very instrumental about 4 years ago. I think he just about lived in Southampton. He helped us with the master plan update. I believe he's also involved in the open space and recreation plan update and the housing production plan. So if there's anybody from Pioneer Valley Planning Commission that kind of knows the ins and outs of Southampton, Ken's a pretty good resource. So welcome back, Ken. I think it's been a while since we've seen you back here, so we're looking forward to whatever information you may share about this topic for us, and I'll leave it at that. But again,
To Ken
thanks.
and Kyle, and
Yep.
we'll do brief introductions around the room.
Yep.
Some of us have been introduced 3 times.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and maybe you guys need to either take this or stand at the mic, one or the other. It's
Yeah.
probably easier just to be at the mic.
Good evening, boards. Ken Comia, Deputy Director of Land Use and Environment at the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. It's great to be back in Southampton. I was on my drive here, living in Easthampton. I was trying to remember the time that I spent in Southampton over the past 4 years, which was specific to doing a lot of the planning processes during COVID, particularly, and having a brief conversation with Stephen through email, and then Paul through email, and then the town administrator through email, it got me excited about the possibilities of this particular acquisition that you've gotten. But with that said, we're obviously here to discuss with you and maybe reconnect some of the information that we tried to dig up based on some of the work that we've done in the past 10 plus years, which both Kyle and I have not, we're not at PVPC at the time, so we're trying to fill in the blanks. So getting to hear from folks out here will be helpful. But yeah, looking forward to the conversation. Kyle?
Good evening, boards. Thank you very much. I'm Kyle Fennell from Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, Senior Planner in Land Use and Environment. I'm actually currently supporting the town of Southampton, working with the planning board and your planning consultant, Richard Harris, revising the water supply protection district bylaw. So I'm been getting familiar with the town, and I'm also supporting other communities in the Pioneer Valley as they investigate and explore the topic of 40R in their respective communities. So I've been learning a lot about this particular program, and I'm excited to answer some questions and hopefully inspire some action from the boards. Thank you very much for having me tonight.
Great. Brian, do you want to continue the round robin?
I'm just here as a non-zoning board.
For everyone's benefit. Maybe everyone knows you. Okay. Janet, why don't you continue around?
Introduce myself?
Okay, we can dispense with introductions. I see we want to get down to business. This is a learning meeting, and I am not an expert. I am, however, insistent that the information be brought forward in a thorough and factual way. So that's my role, is to be the
Facilitator?
bug in the saddle, something, the burr in the saddle, that's what it is. At best, a facilitator. So expectations, concerns, questions. Chris made brief reference to the fact that not only have we invested community resources and public engagement in creating and updating a master plan and a housing production plan, open space plan, greenway plan. So this is perhaps building on all of that, plus an earlier effort looking at 40R. And since I'm new to town and new to this role, I would invite Ciara or someone who remembers that prior experience, Paul, to just give us an anchor point for what we do and don't know about 40R and why it didn't move forward last time. And if anybody wants to just wander around and write other questions or concerns on the chalkboard, we'll collect those. This is meant to be workshop-y, and I'm really pissed that we have it set up as board and audience. That's not appropriate. Certainly with me on this side. Paul, others, who remembers?
Paul was here, or no, Paul was almost here.
No, I was here during that last study, and it was in 2011 when it was done, and the report was filed by PVPC in 2012, and that was from a DLTA grant that we received that year to investigate 40R. The packet that I passed out, hopefully you have one, it had a chart. There was a 166-page report, which I was not going to distribute to everyone. The board has a copy by email, the town administrator does, and I asked him if he would like to share it with the select board at some point. I did send it to Ciara. It's quite a lengthy report, but the chart that I had, which was a single sheet, was the culmination of what they found out in terms of statistics in their study. Now, the 40R and I'm going to depend on Ken and Kyle for their expertise going forward to probably correct me on some of my comments here, but as I recall, the main focus of that was mixed use with a heavy emphasis on residential in either 2- or 3-story buildings. In the area of Red Rock shops, because the proximity to Easthampton sewer was the key to it all. And with the shopping center there, now an urgent care center years later, a pharmacy and other amenities, that section of town was earmarked as a place where 40R and the residents that lived there would have access to it walking and not necessarily needed vehicles to do so. The study also encompassed sidewalks that would be necessary from the Red Rock Plaza area down. The district encompassed just before the Manhan River as you're heading south, I believe. And again, design standards would had to have been adopted by the board going forward. But again, the main focus, and I believe that's what's going to be probably paramount in this discussion tonight, is the availability of sewer. Now, I don't know for sure why it didn't go forward, the report. Obviously, this board, and I take some responsibility for it because I was on the board at the time, that why it didn't proceed further. But there were no engagement, to my knowledge, with Easthampton at the time about any access to sewer. So it died, obviously. And one of the main reasons, the Midtown area, there were 3 areas originally looked at in that study. The village center here, Midtown, which is across now from the Bree property that's in the focus tonight, and then the Easthampton line. When they looked at all 3 areas, and again, I'm sounding like a broken record because of sewer, the PVPC did not decide to study any of these other 2 areas because of the distance and the costs associated with the infrastructure coming this way. So that's all I can tell you about what I know and what I remember. But the report is quite comprehensive. If anyone would like a copy of it, I can certainly email you it. It's pretty extensive, and PVPC did a great job on it. And hopefully, maybe that plan could be resurrected and brought up to date if the boards or the community so desires. But it's there, and you did a fine job with it. That's all I can offer you.
Anything further?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add briefly, I think in dusting it off, because it literally was trying to find it within many folders of work, as Kyle mentioned, he's focusing a lot of his efforts on some of the projects that he's doing with other communities on 40R, so I'll maybe leave some of the specifics to him. But I think with regards to any planning process, Paul is correct in that, your master plan has identified those 3 particular areas where presumably you could have, looked at smart growth, 40R. With that said, I also think based on, I pulled up the application form, which was prepared by someone named John Furman. We may have initially talked with that person back then. The email address here is VHB, so it was probably more of an engineering firm that may have helped PVPC with some of the regulatory things, whatnot, and the analysis. As Paul shared with you, it's that type of analysis that the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities will require for an application. The application is quite extensive, and oftentimes I saw that Stephen had emailed Bill Raelt. He will be your best friend as you pursue 40R if that's something that you want to do, because he's
with the Executive Office
of Housing and Livable Communities, correct.
Just rolls off your tongue.
Yeah.
We're going to see Bill's slideshow next.
Yes, and he does his spiel all over the Commonwealth. With that said, yeah, I think looking at the Gateway Smart Growth District, as Paul was mentioning, it seemed like the easiest lift based on the fact that the infrastructure was there. But I think the context is very important. If there was no engagement with the city of Easthampton at the time, then it's likely there was no momentum to really get anywhere with the application. But yeah, I think, for the purposes of providing some context for the boards, this is a tried and true process. If the Smart Growth District is something that seems appropriate for maybe this newly acquired parcel, that probably makes sense. I think, as Paul was mentioning, the availability of infrastructure, the water and sewer, that's going to be probably of most importance to the townspeople with regards to the support for that. But I will say that also there are conversations that a lot of communities, more rural communities that may be looking at 40R, have been navigating septic. I'm not saying that is something that the town, would want to do, especially if it intends to maybe utilize this particular area for more commercial growth and mixed uses. You'd probably want that capacity there. But I also understand that the town also has been, doing its due diligence with its infrastructure study, the sewer study, and I think that would be helpful to kind of understand.
So we'll circle back to that.
Yeah.
It's worth saying, yes, sewer is being specifically explored. We have contract tie and bond to look at the feasibility of connecting to Easthampton up as far as Gun Road. And that would service we're going to cycle back to that, a region bigger than this parcel, but we'll cycle back to that. So we're looking at what would that look like to go forward in concert with the Greenway development and also provide the kind of sanitary services we need as this business district sits today, as it's redeveloped, and certainly as we look forward with goals, hopes for the new acquisition. So we'll do questions as soon as...
I think way back when there were many studies done, sewer studies, I think done along Route 10 itself that proved to be extremely costly. I know there were consulting firms that had done more than one study. We've got volumes of paper upstairs of reports of this that, just, I don't know whether some of that, the results of those were also discouraging, shall we say, from the cost point of view. Such that also maybe was a factor that nothing ever really went forward. Well, I'm not sure, but I know there had been a lot of work done at one point in time looking at sewer feasibility along Route 10, which kind of stalled many years ago.
Right. We'll circle back to the sewer question.
But I think it'd be interesting too with Kyle just to understand. This study with 40R, obviously it's been around for a long time, but just understanding the history of it a little bit and what may have changed in regulation or key things that may have changed that make it more palatable or more viable maybe for a town like Southampton over the last 10 or 12 years, because I'm sure something has changed that makes it maybe a matter of timing, where maybe before we were too early for what we really knew we needed, and now maybe something will coincide. So I think as we discussed tonight, it would be good to hear that perspective from you guys.
Indeed, and we're going to talk about sewer in detail in a minute. Here's what I'm trying to find. Bill's slideshow. Ken, you've probably seen this more than I have.
I think Kyle was coming up in that number, but both of us have seen that. Bill has given these presentations multiple times.
Right, so let me see about getting my screen a little bit larger. This is not optimal. I know it's an unsecured network. Come on.
Is it supposed to be up on there?
Uh-oh.
It's getting there.
I tried to do that once.
Via kicked me out.
While Stephen pulls that up, let me just say, anybody that's speaking who's not at a mic at the up front might want to go to the podium. It's hard to hear you otherwise.
Or can you hear me out there?
Microphone, yeah. Okay, now it's on. Thanks, Cindy. Sorry about that. While we have a second, I missed one introduction. We also have Ann Bowman here. She's a member of the public, but she's also about to be on the Housing Authority. She just did the application. We voted to approve, and she's going to the select board. So, Ann, thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's
Well, if you don't mind, while you're waiting for the presentation, on that sheet I gave with the statistics on it, it wasn't totaled, but I just did some quick math on it tonight for the possible available residential units for a two-story or three-story building, which was interesting. I had no idea that it created that many numbers, but the minimum amount in a two-story building for that area that was under the study was 338 units, and the maximum was 371. And if you put a three-story building in that area, and that scenario, I believe, Ken and Kyle, is if 2 or 3-story buildings were built the length of either side of the roadway in that area, correct? Not just one 3-story building. It would be several 2- and 3-story buildings throughout that district, right? To create that kind of number.
had it up a minute ago.
I would think the presumption is based. That I think that calculation is probably based on the developable land, and if you were to use all 3-story products, whatever that looked like, and the requirements for the underlying zoning, more than likely, yes, that would be the case.
And then the number goes up significantly if you're looking at a 3-story building, 428 minimum units and a maximum of 561. So those are pretty big numbers for residential units that could be adopted just in that stretch of Route 10 on both sides from Red Rock down to Manhattan.
But Paul, doesn't our aquifer have limitations though for the number of housing units that can be placed in a certain number of acres? Or
I would have expected in that study that that would have taken into consideration, correct? I mean, we don't need that answer tonight, but that would have been my assumption anyway, that would have had to been taken into consideration.
The developable land, subtracting any wetlands and any other of the environmentally sensitive areas.
right?
That's what you would base your calculation on.
So this is a good time for you to chime in, Ryan. Earlier studies of the property published a set of development plans. We have the existing conditions sheet here. Can you drive that for me? And mentioned by the prior proponent on the existing conditions sheet is information about the soils, and they're characterized as excessively well drained. It also cites the DEP nitrogen loading limit, ostensibly for on-site septic, at 4 bedrooms per acre. Okay, that's DEP's Title V system. Oh my goodness. And yet, what I understand from our health agent is that in the case of excessively well-drained, is it 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms per acre? So these are unusually well-drained soils that dump effluent rapidly with little treatment, so the DEP Title V regulation requires lower density development. And that's entirely independent of whatever zoning we have in place. So it gets to the point that the property is nice and level. It's going to be easy to move dirt around, but it's going to be a very big challenge to deal with septic on site. I don't know how far the public safety building took it in terms of specific design, or if they just spitballed it for the feasibility study. But we need to figure out a better way to deal with the effluent. I don't know whether package treatment plants these days offer anything. I know that the town has had presentation from PVPC, and or maybe it was some consultants in the not too distant past. We're looking at sewer. And I remember what I wanted to say, Madam Chair, that a la carte, each one of these capital improvements looks staggering. It's hugely expensive. Wrap them together in a logical sequence and use all of our political clout to seek state and federal grants, because they're starting to work in synergy. We'll come back around to that after we look at the slideshow that I promised. I still don't know how big I'm going to make it, but this is where I got in trouble before. Single page view. All right, it's not going to do that. Okay, and then we go back to the beginning instead of the end. So, welcome, folks. Here we are. It's Chapter 40R in the Mass General Laws, and then there are a bunch of implementing regulations. Starter homes, that's the smart growth piece. Starter home zoning apparently is a different chapter in Mass General Laws, and of course they each have their own acronyms. So we'll step through this quickly so we can get to questions and answers. So this is a voluntary program to encourage the adoption and implementation of zoning that allows compact and mixed-use development by right. You give up the multi-step permitting and have, in effect, a special permit. Where? Areas that have existing commercial development, they say existing and planned infrastructure, and access to retail services and jobs. So a business district is an example. How? Financial incentives and a tool to better manage residential growth by directing it where you want to have it, build it at scale, and use that as an incentive to draw public investment in the infrastructure you need.
Stephen, can you just put your mic a little bit closer to you?
Oh, it's me that she can't hear. I'm sorry.
Laptop there.
Basics and overview, the requirements. You have to first qualify the location in town. We heard about that and looking at 3 different areas, Red Rocks. In the earlier times, this was the village center, and the area that we're talking about in particular tonight was called Midtown. Is that right? It's all happening in Midtown. Eligible location. Densities by right are huge. Single family, up to 8 units as a minimum. 4 if it's the starter home scenario. 2 to 3 family, the density increases. Multifamily, 20 units per acre. So you're really talking about apartment houses. And it has to be, I think a lot of this is really at 20% affordability. 10% is the asterisk for the starter home. And the piece that gets all the communities interested, and damn it, I wish we had Richard Harris to do his spiel again, because he was town planner in South Hadley, ushered them through 40R, and was quite high on the income that that provided to the town. There's a little bit more, oh, it is right here. When you get your district qualified, before anything gets built, depending on how many potential units are, well, you get a zoning incentive when you pass the zoning, and it's scaled. I don't know where we would fall. But it also depends on the size of the district, which we'll look at in a minute. One concept, it's what we're looking at for sewering. And then as the units get built, you get a kicker of $3,000 per unit. And if you incur school costs, and there's a way complicated formula for that, you also get a contribution from the state in consideration of the new growth in the school system. Eligible location, transit-oriented development. We have no transit. We can reserve a space, but we'll promote the greenway as an alternative form of transit. An area of concentrated development, it kind of is, but I think that's a harder one to sell than other highly suitable locations. So remember that wonderful jargon, highly suitable locations. Transit access, we don't have rail, bus, or ferry. Concentrated development, we meet many of these criteria if you look at the area that's being explored for sewer. You can read it. It has to be 50% commercial development or commercial zoning in place, and we'll look at that in our case. If not sewered, eligibility is discretionary unless the area qualifies an existing rural village. It's all well and good. I don't think we have the technology to deal with the effluent on this site. And I don't mean to be adding my opinion so liberally here. Other highly suitable locations, transportation, like a state highway, infrastructure, public water, walkability, safe routes to schools on Route 10 and about to be added on Pomeroy Meadow, and the Greenway, of course. Land use zoning in the district will look at infill redevelopment, and you might tee up a question around infill redevelopment, what that looks like for generating new income. And prior planning, we spoke about the master plan and the housing production plan in particular. It's as of right with site plan review at the planning board? Yes. Mm-hmm. Other zoning requirements do not apply. Lot size, setbacks, all that. We're in a brave new world. Design standards are a whole thing, and I'm not going to get very much involved in that tonight, but it's important that the development program look like Southampton. We've gone through that with the public safety building discussion. What should the outside look like? We're not a rich town. We're a town that's committed to our citizens. So where's that appropriate middle ground? Similarly, if we're building commercial spaces and residential spaces and affordable housing, you know, it's got to look good and to work together. No age restrictions, but, you know, if you have rental housing that's 1 and 2 bedroom predominant, it is suitable for an older couple or single that's looking for a less expensive housing. Must be primarily residential, but I think that it has flexibility about mixed use more than our current zoning of key parcel. So we touched on affordability minimums. I think we should set the goal higher if we can, but it's a mix of affordability levels. There are 4 or 5 different levels, and we might try and hit all of them, all the way up to what's described as workforce housing. That's kind of geared towards that municipal worker who's not making a lot of money, or tradesperson who's not a master plumber, but they're a journeyman. And how do they get started? So affordability at several different levels. It's not just very, very poor people. And starter home zoning districts all the way up to 110% of the area median income. And of course, you have to look that up, what that all means. The financial incentives, you know, if we're looking at a good size district with a good size potential for new and redeveloped units, it could be a meaningfully large payment when your bylaw is approved. And that can only be used for capital costs, which I don't know if that includes the final design for sewer, but maybe it's a down payment on town match for sewer. The process. We've found Bill at the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, and we'll be following up with him. Local public hearing on zone application. We're not doing that tonight. We're just learning tonight. But there will be more opportunities for the public to hear and voice their opinion about a potential zoning article, which would have to be adopted in the normal course, however we do that. But the state also determines whether we're eligible, so those exceedingly desirable qualities have to actually pass the local zoning, provide them evidence, they give you a letter of approval, and you're ready to go off and do your project. Oh, and get paid. Anything else?
In the previous slide, Stephen,
Yeah.
about 40S a little bit, could you kind of skipped over it?
Oh, did I? I'm sorry.
It was intentional, but because it wasn't applicable, or keep going, please. 40S.
Oh, 40S is a school reimbursement, and it's based on your specific experience in the lease out, and I could not comment on the calculation. Is it a significant amount?
Yes, so to my understanding in conversation with the executive office, there's only been 2 communities to date that have consistently applied for reimbursement through the program. They're on the east side of the state. I think Reading is one of them. So this applies for new students that enter the system that reside within the district,
Yep.
the new 40R district. The 40S program requires annual reporting to prove that those students are, enrolled and living there. Unfortunately, it is not funded annually, so it hasn't been a consistent program to draw funding from. But again, there's only been, I think Lunenburg might actually be one of the communities that has also dipped into the funding. So there is a bit of a complex formula associated with it. So it's...
The housing bond bill include anything for this, or is that not at that level of granularity?
I have not seen anything in my summaries of the bond bill related to 40S, but I'll circle back to that. That's a fair question.
Explain what you mean by it's not funded annually.
There's no line item in the annual budget dedicated to this.
It's just there is going to run out.
Yeah, and then it has to be, negotiated. Some advocates have to go to the state and, voice their desires for the funding. It's not a lot, to my understanding, communities haven't been using it. I think mostly because of the effort it takes to just prove that the school district has been, taking on an additional burden with those greater enrollment numbers. But it's also just an inconsistent funding source.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. That cover it, Janet? The process slide we've been over.
Stephen, on the next slide, the last slide, that slide there, the way I'm understanding this, I'm not sure if it's in chronological order, but is it that the EOHLC first determines the eligibility before we'd ever go to a town meeting scenario? Is that what happens? Yeah, okay. Got it.
If I may. There is a potential, though, if you were to go through a 40R process and you were to send in the application and EOHLC determined you're ineligible at the time, if you were to put into place the zoning that would meet the requirement, just thinking about the zoning element, eligibility could be, the district could be determined ineligible because of other factors, not the zoning. The communities can apply for 40R eligibility with existing zoning in place if it meets those requirements. So you could circle back if the zoning itself would meet the criteria and you wanted to push ahead and you had the political impetus and support, you could enact the zoning, have a smart growth overlay district on the books, and then come back when you might have checked off those other criteria.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been adopted in communities across the state, but a little bit more on the eastern side of the state and more built-up places. But if you look at us here in the Hampshire-Hamden border, we're the one that's missing in this metropolitan cluster. And you can say, well, we're not Westfield and we're not Easthampton, but we are in the middle, and the middle always gets hurt. So it's time for us to chart our own destiny.
Can I ask a question, folks?
Yep, we're going to.
Yep.
Oh, there you are.
I'm up here, yep, on a pond in northern Vermont. So a couple things. First of all, Paul Deeman mentioned that this original study went back like a decade. And I'm wondering how old the slideshow is, specifically in terms of potential reimbursement. Has that been altered at all? Because everything else is more expensive now. And secondly, is this based on state budgeting in terms of success in getting the kinds of support that you're outlining in the slideshow, Stephen? Does anybody know if this is dated and if there'll be an update in any of that?
To just understand the question, you're asking if the incentive payments have changed over time. To my knowledge, they have not. So the initial scheme of incentive payments based on future zoned units has remained the same from the initial legislation being passed in the early 2000s. which is a bit unfortunate because costs of development have increased dramatically. Those payments are guaranteed though, so they're not as vulnerable as the 40S funding. So if a 40R district is adopted, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities guarantees that payment. So.
The second part of my question was, and you sort of answered it in terms of the guarantee, but that it's not based on the budget, the state budget, the governor's budget, et cetera. It's guaranteed.
To my understanding, in conversation with, again, Bill Rail, he's the expert, and I believe he reviewed the application back in 2012. To my understanding, there hasn't been an applicant that was approved that did not get their incentive bonus. So.
Reading has a downtown district, and you'll get to see that in a minute. So apparently I'm getting kicked off every time the access code changes.
So while we're waiting for that, Kyle, did I understand you correctly? Then we could work on an overlay district or districts prior to any application?
Yes, that's accurate. So if the planning board wanted to take that up, it's essentially it's a zoning overlay district mechanism. So similar to how you might draft a floodplain overlay or a water supply overlay. You know, there is base zoning that remains in place. And the planning board would go about creating all the criteria for setbacks, design standards, densities, whatnot. You could, and in effect, the way the application is built for 40R, there is a model bylaw that EOHLC drafted many years ago. And the expectation is when you apply, you actually build your model, your bylaw for the town off of the model. So they like to see a line by line, you know, how are you taking the model, adapting it to the local circumstances of the community to meet the criteria and prove eligibility. Mm-hmm. That model is available. You could take that on as a planning board, start working towards developing a smart growth district, kind of in abstraction or in concept, and then decide to move forward with an application when you deem it's appropriate.
We're going to not fuss about the rest of these slides. We've slid into the question and answer period, and I think that that's perfect. What is going to be harder, Scott, is for you to guide us through how we decided on the district for the feasibility study of the sewering, and then we'll connect that to the 40R concept for Midtown. We're going to have a jazz club in this if we're calling it Midtown.
So I had a follow-up question on what you just said, which is just, don't you think that if we did take the initiative to establish that zoning first, they would be more likely to approve our request just because they'd be so proud of us?
I think that's a wonderful question, and my hopeful answer would be yes. Based on my understanding of the program historically, I think there were many communities, some in the Pioneer Valley, for example, that were early adopters that have developed 0 housing units in their 40R districts. I believe over the years, the department, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, they've become more cautious when it comes to applying. Early adopters built their districts over one large parcel. They tend to caution against that. So I think if the community were to take it on to explore smart growth broadly, just as a concept, keeping it aligned with the 40R application, showing a dedication to that, I think would be favorable. Yeah.
While you're up there, maybe you can address my question. I brought this up to Mr. Harris as well when he brought 40Rs to the planning board. My concern was, say we had set up a 40R district and we have all the best intentions of getting housing built, but for whatever reason, it doesn't work out. Does the state have any mechanism to pull any of that funding back if in the end we do not succeed in getting any of the affordable housing built?
Right. Fair question. I've heard it from other communities.
Yeah.
In conversation with Bill Rail, they have never retracted or rescinded that incentive payment. I believe, reviewing the legislation, they have the authority to do so.
Okay, yeah.
But to my understanding, they have not done that.
Right. So I think it's, from the town's perspective, as long as we have the plan, as we're talking about how we can pursue this, we're going about this with all of the providing all the good faith that's possible, that we intend to do this. So I mean, the state has to take us on that.
Absolutely.
Can I ask two more questions before you sit down?
Sure.
So first of all, you mentioned early on, I think, about the application process, and it sounded like it's kind of an onerous process. Can you give us an idea of the kinds of things, not in detail, but just the kinds of things that we have to think about including in an application, and then what other communities in the general area, if there are any, that may have been going through or are going through this whole idea of the 40R right now, or in recent memory?
Sure. So first, to the elements of an application. The largest element would be the zoning bylaw itself and all the required components. Additionally, though, there has to be an analysis. The slide that Paul handed out, the spreadsheet, that's part of an impact analysis to show various scenarios of build out. So that would be a component, and there would be required narrative to explain, how those calculations come about. Local maps are required. They have to see the delineation of the district, which is, in my professional experience, though not the best place to start the conversation with the community. Drawing lines on maps usually kind of causes friction. So you have locus maps, impact analysis, proof of infrastructure or plans for infrastructure improvements to meet those criteria. Your zoning bylaw, there has to be a copy of a public notice to show that you've had a public meeting to discuss it, so that it's not just being slipped under the public's eyes, and I believe that's all to my recollection right now. But there are, just looking at the past experience, summary of the district, you have to identify the category for eligible locations. So, as was said earlier, like transit-oriented development, that does not qualify for your community. Overall size of the parcel of the district, the percentage of the area, the 40R cannot exceed, I believe, in total 20 to 25% of the total land area of the community. You can't make a whole town 40R district. So you have to just kind of provide those calculations. Identify if there's an existing rural village district already in place. I think I've land area, developable area, again, talking to what is actually developable, which that's where your soils studies and your infrastructure, all that in place.
Any communities in general?
Oh, communities. So to date, there are 7 communities in the Pioneer Valley, Hampshire and Hampden counties that have 40R districts on the books. Northampton, Easthampton, Westfield, South Hadley, Holyoke, thank you. Holyoke and, Chicopee, yes, and Palmer. Currently, there are 2 communities that are exploring the topic. East Longmeadow, focusing on their center town district, that's what they're calling it, right around the Rotary, and their municipal complex. And Hadley is exploring it along Route 9, broadly. Yeah. And of the existing districts, there's only one that has not developed any housing units. And that would be in Westfield.
In Westfield.
How long have they had the district?
Most of those districts were in the late 2000s. 2008, I believe, is Westfield.
So they've had 16 years of the district with no housing.
Yeah, if you're familiar with driving south towards Southwick, leaving town, there's a little brew pub that overlooks some fields. That's their district.
So the fact that at the core of this, there's an undeveloped parcel means that we maybe have an edge up in terms of drawing lines on a map. Drawing lines on, well, let me first.
I just want,
sorry.
you had just referred to something earlier, something about they're not happy it's just in one area of the district. So, I mean, the parcel we're kind of looking at is just one area. I don't know if that would be the entire overlay district. Mm-hmm. So if we did one in one area, they would be more receptive to having more than one small. I just wanted to clarify what I thought I heard you say.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I misspoke, but historically, early adopters of 40R would delineate a single parcel, so one lot on the property map. The now Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities frowns upon that. They would like to see multiple pieces of property beyond, trying to be a little bit more expansive.
What do you mean by pieces of property?
So if looking at the map, so the property that we're discussing tonight, a total of 56 acres, is actually 3 lots drawn on the property map, 3 deeded lots, right? So it's a lot of area. It's 56 acres. It could be looked upon favorably. They could come back and suggest expanding it to include, all the way to Lynn Road or even further on the south side of College Highway. They could even suggest delineating across the highway to include some of the more densely currently developed, I believe there are apartment complexes and condominiums and such.
If I could, I just want to go through the list and we'll bounce off of this again. Because we keep saying, if it's not already a rural village center, if it's not a transit-oriented, then it has to have these highly suitable features, right? Good? So we have a blank slate at 117 to 125 College Highway and a wish list for mixed-use housing and commercial. And the town would like to stimulate economic development in the community in addition to housing development. So looking at effective ways to blend those two things on this blank slate, but it's larger than 117, 125 if you look at the other highly suitable criteria. An existing business district is certainly much bigger than the fringe piece of 117 to 125. So there's an existing business district right along Route 10 in this half-mile stretch that you see in the sewer feasibility study. Post office, an example of a civic building. A major intersection that defines the community. Pomeroy Meadow and Route 10 certainly is that. A school, Norris School, is at the top of the map just off the extent that you see. Pedestrian infrastructure. We have existing sidewalks that were developed with safe routes to schools, and we have TIP scheduled improvements, safe routes to schools. Plus the Greenway, which is a destination pedestrian resource. And really, if you look in the area inside that yellow polygon there, Route 10, Pomeroy Meadow, and Gun Road extension, it includes many of the businesses, almost all of the multifamily in town, and the smallest starter homes, the original starter homes in Southampton. So it looks like it's got a whole handful of highly suitable features. How do you work with qualifying this neighborhood if you only apply the zoning on a portion of it? Or do you need to be expansive and look at, this is my redevelopment question, what does redevelopment of a facility like Hampton South condominiums or one of the older apartment buildings that's looking at a failing septic system, and maybe they're already going ahead with a, as best you can, replacement on existing site that has the same limited soils, we presume. So, we've got 56 acres, maybe about 45 on the west side of the Greenway, because 11 is going to be conservation. Do we get bonus points for doing conservation?
I don't know for sure. That's
All
a great
right.
question.
It's flanked by conserved farmland to the north and to the south. So it's a wonderful context, and it also has frontage on the Manhan River, which is a sensitive habitat identified by natural heritage, endangered species. There's been a lot of work on connectivity because we do have anadromous species in the river that need to be able to move back and forth. So I think that we can ring a lot of bells in terms of the public benefits, and in so doing, recruit a lot of support, political and otherwise. I'm not going to try and describe the existing zoning, just mention that it is residential village and commercial village, and they have their own peculiar provisions for multifamily and various permitting processes. Again, I drew it from Parsons Village submission to the ZBA of 18 months ago or two years ago. Sewer feasibility study is now keyed up for Scott to talk us through.
So the town's contracted with...
You need a mic.
So the town's contracted with Ty and Bond to provide a sewer feasibility study, and I think one of the main differences from the previous ones that we've done is really looking at access instead of along 10, which is obviously a state road, looking at access for the main sewer to connect to Easthampton would be through the Greenway property, or the Greenway rail trail along the south. As Stephen mentioned, that this area is very, I guess, dense in terms of Southampton. It's probably the densest area. You have the condominiums, you have the apartment buildings, you have the Paisano Plaza, you have the school, obviously, and then if we were to develop the 52, 56 acres with additional housing, I think that'd be a good candidate for 40R and the sewer. We hope to have the sewer feasibility study probably around October, November, I think. The good thing about using Ty and Bond is they're already familiar with Easthampton's sewage facility plant and the design of their their pipes. So that should expedite it a little bit more. But obviously, the big question is the cost and how we can defray that with grants and other earmarks moving forward. So that's where we are.
Right, so if you zoom out a little bit, the blue, or whatever color that is, line, is the outside of the feasibility study.
I have a question for Scott. So, Ty and Bond is doing feasibility. What was the outcome of discussion that I believe you and Stephen had with the mayor of Easthampton? Are they accepting, and how much will they accept? Has that been agreed upon?
The technical aspect has to be talked to between their DPW, Ty and Bond, and obviously Southampton. But I can tell you that the mayor is very supportive of this.
She is.
And Ty and Bond has assessed the infrastructure in place and backed out as best they could the first cut at what the water use is being dumped into the sewer, or they have sewer rates too. Anyway, there's a likelihood that there's plenty of capacity for this entire district built out. But it's a feasibility study. Where will that take us? It will give us a sense that it could or couldn't fit in conjunction with the development of the Greenway. Ty and Bond is also the Greenway designer. So they have all the GIS loaded up. They have survey data, but they will only take the sewer to a feasibility. It's bigger than the bread box. It's likely to cost X. And then if we decide to pursue it, we'd have to hire engineers to take it to 25% design to apply for grants and ultimately put it out to bid.
The part of this that's been confusing to me, not the 40R, but the timing and the how shall I say it?
Prerequisites for?
No, what's the priority? I mean, is the public safety complex and the senior center going to wait for sewer before they break ground? So that is where I'm confused, because I would have expected a land use study would have been done first, and the safety complex, the senior center take priority over that, and then this 40R would come after that. But it seems to me, I get a little bit confused on all the moving parts in what is going to be done and what is going to be waiting for sewer and the timing of it all.
Well, I can tell you that we're looking at ways that we can bring in a land use planner right now, at least not on staff, but through a contractor to help us start with the land use planning. We don't own the land yet, so we're going to be closing on it in late September. Once we have ownership, then the planning phases are going to start. So we're going to hire a land use planner to help us go through that process. We're in the middle of redesigning, or I guess revisioning, our public safety complex right now. We do have a pretty firm plan for the Council on Aging as well, but we need someone to kind of help us bring that together, figure out where we're going to locate it, what other types of uses there could be possible, and obviously sewer is going to play a big part on that. So whether or not sewer is going to be available for, new housing, or if it has to remain a much smaller project, that's really to be determined.
So for all intents and purposes, though, the 40R concept here and the idea is going to be somewhat down the road after the safety complex and the senior center.
Right. We're gonna have to locate the safety complex and the senior center first, and then from that point we would see what's available.
And then I would expect you would then encompass a 40R district or adopt a 40R zoning district after the fact to encompass those areas with those buildings already in place. Correct?
I have an idea or thought. Oh, thank you very much. I forget about that part. Just thinking through what was said about a 40R before is there is that whatever it is, like $500,000. They provide to the town for signing a 40R district. I'm wondering if we use that in timing, if we were to get all things arranged such that we're applying for grants and that is our matching piece, then starting the 40R sooner would allow us to secure that money to pursue the implementation of the sewer. So I was thinking about funding.
Is that going to include the infrastructure?
So I think that's the question of how much it costs and how it would be funded is something that has to be included, studied, but I think that I heard people mention like looking at grants, right? And there has to be a match, and to get that you have to have a certain percentage complete, so the 40R district could be a funding mechanism to get that part of the work done.
Maybe. I think just to tie in a little bit to Paul, having been on both of the feasibility committees, both structures, both the public safety building and the future senior center are both designed with septic in mind right now. That is the design. So that's probably still going to be, in my mind, just given the cost of both of those facilities, and the urgency of both of those coming into play, I personally would see those, and this is my own personal opinion, see those coming first before we get into really developing the whole housing process. So, I mean, the sewer thing hopefully will turn out to be feasible, but it's going to be another cost. And how we finance all of this from borrowing to grants is going to be a huge challenge for all the facilities we want to do. But right now, both facilities are being designed with septic in mind.
Sure. Just to follow up on Paul's point, I've been an advocate since February of having professional land planning services to especially begin with the public engagement piece. And I have to say that with the good work that public safety and seniors have done on their feasibility studies, the rest of our boards and committees need to run fast and catch up. This is a process tonight of helping the Housing Authority understand what the range of possibilities are for dealing with this newly acquired property. I think that it very well may be the case that a public safety building is built first, and it may have to have a septic system. But we absolutely need, past this scope, I know Paul's received it several times electronically. We're sending the scope of services around for the public engagement and land planning services. It's probably not one individual, it's technical and process both. But it also begins with us, each of the boards and committees. So we've also developed a one-page, tell us what your wish is. So let's pick on somebody. Let's pick on the Parks Department. So Town of Southampton, land use master planning wish list from the Housing Authority. Title of land use, athletic facilities or courts, fields. Next question. Yeah, give it a 3-sentence description, but tell us what's the footprint of the building or built area? How many parking spaces do you need? What are your wants and don't wants? And there are at least 6 boards, committees, and authorities that need to chime in on that. Seniors can do it real fast. Fire is evolving, but they're the best developed. I think there's synergy in planning it all together, and that's why I continue to be an outspoken advocate for moving forward with professional help.
I see this as a 40R runs parallel to the other projects, right? I mean, it sounds like it's a lengthy process, and to wait for public safety and seniors and then begin the process, it seems like it makes more sense to run parallel, to develop the district while we're doing, and the public safety and the senior center is part of the district.
If we
You know,
can't
so-
answer how many units we want to build on this parcel, we can't finish the application for 40R. So we do need the land planning, the public engagement, the synergy, so that we can write a bylaw that facilitates the type of development program we envision, not something that was baked in Boston. And we can do it.
So you're not in agreement at all with the original 40R study done for the Easthampton line?
Paul, I started by saying I apologize. It was done before my time. I'm not familiar with it. As a professional planner, that looks like all redevelopment, not opportunity for significant out of the gate
And according
development.
to Richard Harris, you could also, and correct me if I'm wrong, you fellas, that you could also have multiple districts, overlay districts,
That would
correct?
be fine.
Correct, yes. So in drafting your smart growth zoning, you can have multiple
Anything,
districts.
Paul.
So you could do, you could go back to the original proposal from the 2011 study and feasibility and application. You could think of multiple sub-districts that would, increase your total future zoned units. You could have them be very identical in terms of densities allowed, just different geographies. Or you could actually differentiate and have one that's more mixed use, more commercial. You could have one that's more strictly residential. You could change the degrees of affordability requirements. You could change the design standards even if you wanted the gateway parcel, if you wanted a district towards Easthampton to look different than what you would want in Midtown or the village center, you could determine all that and shape your districts, design your districts accordingly. Another concept that was not really touched on, that was a part of the slides provided from Bill Raelt, 40Y, the starter home zoning district, receives the same incentive bonus payments as 40R. Requires less density. It has a wider range of affordability so that you could have affordability set at 110% of area median income. So more people would qualify. You would have a less required overall units that would have to be affordable as well. So just another concept to consider.
Question. The title's confusing. Is starter home, do they have to be first-time home buyers, or can it be seniors, which is a large part of our population?
It's a great question. I don't believe, I have the regulation in a big pile over there. I don't believe you can legislate ownership necessary. You can't define it. It's more of a size.
Oh, I see.
And also number of bedrooms. So in a starter home district, 50% of dwelling units have to have 3 or more bedrooms to attract the young families that are supposedly, first-time homeowners.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Does the Y district count towards our SHI?
If there is an affordability restriction put on units, all of those units qualify for your subsidized housing inventory. And based on our quick review of the housing production plan, I believe you're currently sitting around 40 plus units, 44, 45-ish. That's about 2%. So you're trying to get to 250 or so affordable units, affordable in perpetuity, to meet that 10% benchmark outlined in 40B. Sorry for all the 40s. But
If we did set the affordability for the starter homes at 110%, then it wouldn't qualify for the SHI. We would have to voluntarily set it lower, or is that not the case?
It's 80% is the.
You're right. You're correct. Thank you. For the SHI, it has to be 80% or less of affordable area median income. Thank you. Sorry.
Actually, I have one more question.
Probably a great time to segue to you, Sierra, and the next item on the agenda was update on the conversations that we've begun with Wayfinders. Their CEO, Keith Ferry, and I guess we're up to 3 different staff working with him, exploring this possibility in Southampton. I saw him at the Rural Massachusetts Conference in Northampton, where Keith Ferry was presenting on the enormous challenge of affordable housing and how sort of practical how a community can be successful with that. Just pass that back to Paul, please.
I have a copy of it.
Well, read it.
I have a lot to read.
I'm sorry. Summer.
Can I ask a quick side question that...
Yes, you can. You have the floor, ma'am.
Apologies if this was already answered and I was spacing out. What is the time expected on the sewer feasibility study being done?
November.
Okay, thanks. And you wanted me to share more about speaking with Wayfinders? Well, a lot of you have sort of already been updated on this, but we did have Wayfinders come out to walk that parcel with us, and they did see potential for affordable housing to be built there and for them to be potentially interested in it. We've been staying in touch with them, mostly because they're sort of like the regional expert on development of affordable housing. And because they actually do some of that development themselves, we asked them for suggestions in terms of like land use planning, and Stephen just sent them a very detailed email.
Well, Wayfinders both develops and manages affordable housing. They're one of maybe 5 community development corporations that are active in the PVPC region, but really they're the sweet spot for us. They're the interested developer and really very collegial in sharing their experience in other communities, things that went smoothly and things that didn't go smoothly.
Right, and they connected me with Ann Capra, who's the design and conservation director for South Hadley, and I got to talk to her about their 40R development process. And you know, the 2 biggest takeaways from that was number 1, 40R is not a magic bullet that creates housing for you. Like they took them a while to get some housing built there, although they do now. The only other thing she cautioned us against was developing stringent design standards without having an architect or planner with us who's experienced with affordable housing, because I guess in their case, the board just sort of like came up with some ideas for the design, and then when people came down to actually trying to do it, a lot of it just wasn't feasible. So just having people at the table who will actually be doing some of that work during that process. So in terms of where we're at with Wayfinders, they did say they would come up with like some kind of vague proposal about like how many units could fit there for us, but
I think what they did was refer us to 2 ongoing affordable housing developments. One, we've been talking about all different.
One in Northampton.
No. Two that are recent, subsequent to Parsons Village, which is that crazy coincidence that the proposed development for 117 to 25 was also called Parsons Village. But Wayfinders did a 40B development of Parsons Village in Easthampton, and it is a good reference point for townhome style development. The 2 that are in construction by Wayfinders are also townhome programs. Village Hill in Northampton has the whole gamut. It's mixed use with mixed results on the commercial retail kind of thing. Office space they've rented out. They have big apartments that are historic rehab. They have new largish apartments, they have townhomes, they have single-family detached, they even have a corner that is co-housing. And so that it spun off a sort of self-sufficient element. The difference in Northampton is it was all run by mass development rather than the community. It did not result in a simple life for the developer or a predictable path, which hopefully 40R could give us.
So your understanding is they're not going to send us any additional info. They're just basically like, here, base it on what we've got in Easthampton.
Tell us how many units or how many acres you think might be available for affordable housing. So I think what we're trying to do, Paul, is for each of the committees to define their puzzle piece. We've got a pretty good sense, although the footprint is evolving with the public safety building. The senior center, they may also wrestle with their cost of building, but there it is. It's being promoted at all kinds of public venues. 12,000 square foot building that needs 80 parking spaces. We've got a footprint, and we can bring that right into the mix. Do you like it better over here or over there or next to this or farther away from that? And there's a synergy that develops, but we each have to own our puzzle piece and put it on the table. And then the community creates a picture. That's what I'm hoping to stimulate here by bringing experts that already have provided a lot of the foundational planning services to the town. We'll also have to hire a dedicated consultant to do our piece of what Paul describes as land planning, and I add is community engagement as well, different skill sets, and that we need to get that going real fast to find the synergy that'll help us afford the sewer, that'll help us keep a really wonderful housing developer on the line collaborating so that when we get to saying this is a housing parcel, it's feasible, and we can put out an RFP and get responses because we've been thoughtful about the land planning and the community has designed it, but with understanding of what a developer can actually fund and develop. We've got to have that piece of reality.
Yeah. I think I'd like to say thank you, Stephen, for pulling all this together, and maybe, I think, laying out that timeline of what are the next steps as you have on the agendas is a place we're ready for. And I agree with that. The land planning part, when you have that person in place and can provide the detail on what, in terms of housing, we could build there and how that fits into the puzzle, right? Then we can apply for a 40R, which it doesn't make sense not to do a 40R if we're going to build affordable housing in this area anyway, to get the benefits of a 40R district defined. So I see that as the next step, as well as getting the results of our sewer study back. So maybe those are the two gating, or the follow-on steps that feed into starting the application for 40R as a planning board.
The planner, looking at the green space, the 117 to 125, would develop collaboratively that program that would answer specifically, okay, the community has spoken and they are up for 25 units or 250 units, or it's going to be 400 bedrooms and you can't do it without sewer. So the sequencing of the studies and the planning for the financing. I think it's very important that we let our elected officials know that we have these kinds of aspirations and that it'll be a 5 to or more year development program, surely, before it's all completed and leased out. It'll be 5 to 10 years.
Well, good things take time.
If they get started right. So I'm hoping that people won't be bashful and they will, who's the point of contact for this going forward? You know, our hired planner could be that sort of confidential good cop, and the treasurer will be the bad cop or whatever. But, you know, I've offered to take people for walks on the property, so individually or collectively as committees, authorities, task forces, you can get a tangible firsthand feeling for the property. We've got maps at scale and trace, and we can, you know, we can color up our own adventure. But really, to prove it out, we're going to need a professional. So identifying the source of funding for facilitation and land planning, I'm not going to venture a number.
DLTA?
Well, we're already using the DLTA grants.
We're always already using it.
Well, of course, you've already discussed how you leverage the various, you know, contributions the town would be willing to make to get additional grants. I think when you have to contemplate what you actually want from the scope of work. So when I initially talked to Scott, the conversation led to, okay, and got some more confirmation today with regards to the Council on Aging and the Public Safety Complex, right? You're nearing some sort of footprint, and that's very important. Understanding visually too where, you know, where those things would go. Obviously, trying to navigate. We've also talked about 40R, any sort of zoning changes that, you know, would be required to allow for different types of uses. You talked about visioning. There are probably specific uses that you may want in this new neighborhood. You're creating a new neighborhood, or there is the discussion put forward about a new neighborhood in Southampton. It's adjacent to a lot of additional density. It's a walkable area, could be. And I think it's just a matter of, like Stephen said, it is identifying both a process, what the expectations would be over a certain time, and try to identify those particular milestones that you would need. You have some dates already with new reporting coming, that it might be, you know, a good time to start thinking about how you want to engage the community regarding this new acquired parcel, knowing that you have these plans for the public safety complex and the Council on Aging that, you know, you can tell them, yeah, we'll put them here and here, but there's a lot of additional land to use for, you know, other types of uses in town. So with that said, yes, I think it requires some sort of facilitation, some visioning, that a consultant would do, in addition to visualizations, because that's very important. You're going to want, you know, to show the community where these places could look. And in addition to that, where, if through the conversations with the various stakeholders, where you could presumably see development, you know, along College Highway, or is it you're going to have some, you know, public open spaces near the river, near the greenway, that the visualizations would help. With regards to costs, I mean, I think you just have to, it is trying to scope out the project and the specificity of the various components that you are seeking. Is there a survey? Is there community meetings that you would imagine? Here is the up to 56 acres that the town has acquired. We may be thinking of putting the 2 spaces, and then what do you imagine? You know, and kind of coming up with a set of regulations or a set of guidelines that presumably could lead to a visualized neighborhood. So yeah.
I'm guessing that's more than a local technical assistance.
Yeah. That being said, yes, it's definitely more than district local technical assistance. There are grants out there. You can leverage district local technical assistance for that. Kyle and I were helping communities use DLTA funds to get more funds through like planning assistance grants. That was in the spring. So that was, actually it was July because they were late. But Community One Stop could also be used for that.
Right, through One Stop, Housing Works. Does Housing Works have site planning support?
I would have to look at that particular program.
We're thinking about cycles of
course.
application, and that one may be too far out when we have a current need.
Yeah. And the thing is, you've identified it correctly. It's the Community One Stop is supposed to acknowledge this community thought. You talk about your planning, your visioning, and then you're using the rest of the funding mechanisms that the Community One Stop provide for, more technical things. And you're like, we're maybe now getting to MassWorks, right? And that's your big grant money. That's for your infrastructure. Yeah, and the presumption is that the town will be doing its due diligence as well as a consultant to identify those pots of money for you to, navigate those larger projects.
For instance, if the senior center wanted to be at the backside of the field, at the edge of the woods, who's going to build the road there? No. There will be a whole community with roads, but in contrast to the fire department, which wants to have explicit frontage on Route 10, the senior center might be composed in this new village, this multi-age village, with attractive amenities. First floor kind of coffee shop and retail, second floor professional offices, third floor apartments, and performance space outdoors. And your pickleball court would have to be on the other side, but everything else that the seniors want would bring another wonderful piece of vibrant community life into this community.
So just talk about how we move this along. Is it a request from the planning board to ask the select board for funding? I guess, what's the mechanism here for the town to get the monies for a study?
We should ask the chair and the town administrator. I mean, we've spoken about several. We do have experience with One Stop. We do have experience with LTA. We do have experience with larger sums of funding for planning projects like the Greenway. So there are funding channels that are specific to recreational trails, to affordable housing.
Just one thing in terms of timing, though. So the one-stop mass trails, all of those are not until the spring. There's usually an expression of interest. Then there's a whole couple of months to develop an application. So you never hear about it until usually May, June, if you're lucky. So that's quite a ways out. I mean, your expressions of interest are usually January, February-ish. So if we're looking for something in terms of a planning process sooner than that, which is what I think I'm hearing, we've got to figure out other sources of funding besides that right now, I think.
It's not going to be cheap to hire, a firm to do the land use planning. We're going to have to find the funding somewhere. More than likely would have to come from something approved by town meeting. Hopefully we have a special town meeting. After that, we're going to have to do an RFP process, which will take 30 to 60 days, do a review process. So we're a little bit of ways from the actual hiring of a land use planner, but you have to remember that this project really is only a few months old. It was only in April that the senior center found out that they couldn't go to their preferred site. And then in May, town meeting approved it, and purchasing the whole 52 acres was only in May, and then obviously the voters approved it in June, and we're closing on it next month. So we're in a very early stage, and there's a lot of moving parts that have to go on.
I think the important thing to say is, we've done a great job as a town moving this project along, and this is I think the most viable and appropriate next step to take in moving this along. So we want to help, I think, as the planning board. I think the question is, perhaps the planning board, what can we provide to, I think it's maybe to the town administration to allow this to seek funding.
Does the select board want to direct each of the potentially interested boards and committees to complete the one-page wish list? Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Well, and right now, that's public safety, that's senior center, that's housing authority. Parks has kind of come and gone, and we're not sure where they are. Open space committee is probably another one. Maybe the school. Those are the ones we've heard about. And I don't know how advanced, I mean, a lot of work has gone into the public safety and the senior center feasibility studies. I mean, these have been months-long, year-long study to get done in order to get that footprint.
We need all that background to...
I know, but we've got that because we've put out money, we've hired consultants, we've spent a year-long process. What I'm saying is these other committees don't have the funding to do that and haven't had the time to put that together. This is a new idea for them as well. So I'm not sure where that's going to go.
Volunteer.
I'm not sure where all that's going to go, but I think we've got to figure out what I guess I'm wondering where, and I don't know where PVPC can help us on this, but given that the earlier study was done, I mean, I don't want us to start from scratch. I mean, it feels like we did something in 2012, we got somewhere with it. Maybe a lot of it, 70% of it, maybe is not relevant anymore. I have no idea, but is it worth taking a stab at looking at that old report somehow with PVPC help? I don't know, question mark, to at least, highlight which areas are still relevant to us that we could then build upon with a new planning process. I guess that would be a question rather than just sort of starting from the beginning again, which is what I'm sort of feeling like we're aiming for here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's always an opportunity to dust off the plan, similar to how you were looking at updating the master plan, or, trying to find the status of many of the strategies that you identified in the master plan. So, the town has local technical assistance, which it can request up to 22 and a half hours of PVPC time to maybe navigate project proposal. I also think that something like this is a great candidate for DLTA. We're nearing the end of the year. I mean, it's weird to say that we're nearing the end of the year, but DLTA is an option to at least, be both a way to really assess the previous plan and see how there may be some connections with the previous work that was done on the 40R, and then also be used as seed money for another grant for additional planning. Maybe, taking a look in the spring where the opportunity may be more timely based on some of the conversations that are happening in town. And obviously you can, throughout that process, identify other ways to engage the community, however, people would want to engage the community at this point. But yeah, I could foresee that we can assist with some sort of thinking around this and spend, a little bit of time thinking about it and how to maybe look at things that were done in the past with regards to 40R and how could it apply now.
Have other communities who have recently gone through the 40R process hired land use planners to support their application?
So what I'll say is that we're currently working with communities to talk through what the communities want. So it's a lot of visioning, surveying, community meetings. These are obviously established neighborhoods already. but identifying possibilities of redevelopment, infill, which is briefly mentioned, that PVPC is providing some support with that. We've also, as Paul mentioned, provided support with Southampton's initial application in 2012.
I was fishing for a list of private firms, consultants that are active in this space. That are your for-profit counterparts or deeper dive.
Yeah, they're out there. That's what I'll say.
I've got a long list. I'm trying to shorten it. Okay.
And I'm happy to engage with you on that, but yeah.
All right. I didn't expect you to give an endorsement. So I hear enthusiasm that we need to move along towards hiring a community engagement and land use planning firm. And we need to find the funding to make that happen. I come back to, we can jumpstart our own situation. Chris and PVPC have identified with Paul getting on top of the 166-page document. I'll read it from cover to cover, and we'll see what that brings. I think continuing to have dialogue with people who are actually interested in developing things, public safety, seniors, and a housing developer will really help inform the process, that we don't go off on a tangent and say we want, glass towers 10 stories tall and no, you don't have a market for that. We need a reality check from professional planners, but also their experience to help us find what I promise are synergies out there. And a good landscape architect, land planner, especially with the engagement of our boards, committees, and authorities, that's what they do all day long. That's what we eat, sleep, and drink.
So I think, Paul, I don't know what you think about doing a DLTA. I mean, it might be something at your next planning board meeting, but I mean, if you think that that's something that would be worthwhile to take a look at the old report and sort of just figure out what parts of that make sense to continue and build upon, or not. I mean, I think it's usually planning board that puts that forward to PVPC, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, every year we apply. I'd like to have a conversation at our next meeting with Richard Harris on an approach, and might even ask you folks for some input. I'm sure he'll probably be in contact with you. But I think we've got to create the overlay district first with the criteria that's necessary for 40R and get that in place for the one district, two districts, whatever we seem to need. And then once that's in place, then we can start the wheels turning on the other. But as for land use planning, I've no clue on where to begin on that. Who might be of assistance is George Russell, because he's a certified planner in the conservation department. He's on the payroll, and he might have some interesting feedback in connections he's got on land use planners that he might guide you on going forward with this.
It's been especially hard to reach Richard Harris. I wonder if you could lead the charge.
Oh, he's on vacation.
I'm jealous. He's been on vacation for months.
That's why he retired from South Hadley.
So is that sufficient clarity? What's Housing Authority going to be working on?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you send us our form to fill out, we got that. And honestly, I think we are going to need this supposed consultants help to come up with what exactly we can do in the acreage. I mean, we can look at, we were just talking about what are the, minimums, densities for 40R for townhouses. If we think that, townhouses are the way we want to go, that's the way Wayfinders is going. We can have some sort of parameters, but I think it's hard, for me, who's relatively inexperienced in this area, to say, okay, sure, we're going to take 6 acres, I want them right here, and there's going to be 80 units. I'm going to need some more help and information on that. So
You just get the ball started, and then it goes in an iterative process.
Do I have a motion to adjourn the Housing Authority meeting?
Yeah, I think we're ready to adjourn.
Good, okay.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, though. Thank you so much.
Does this say,
You're welcome. And with thanks to our special guests from PVPC, Ken and Kyle, it's really great to have you hearing it in real time as we fumble forward. Scott, thank you for being the point person on this.
Just a reminder for the select board not to adjourn. We have one line.
Wouldn't think of it. The planning board has similar intention of doing a small item of business, so you're competing for 2 of us.
Thank you guys for putting this together.
Select will be,
are you having a meeting after this? Is that it? Select board?
That's what he said.
both boards have,
I have just one item.
What do we got?
And it's Richard Harris's contract for the next fiscal year.
did you send that out?
It's right here. And if you want to read all the fine print,
No.
go right ahead. But in essence, $90 per hour plus travel if he comes to meetings. And he has a $7,500 maximum for his
I
service.
move that we approve the contract negotiated by Paul Deman for outside planning consultant.
Second.
All in favor? Do you have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
You got that as 3 yes, 1 no?
301.
All right. One more meeting to go.
No, 310.
Okay.
1-0.
You guys adjourned for planning?
Yes.
So we did have one more topic just to discuss. Things have been moving kind of rapidly at the COA. I know last week we had talked about doing a search committee, and then we were looking at doing internal candidates.
Yep.
We just found out late last week that Deb Bradway is unfortunately she has a personal issue that she's going to prevent her from continuing on in the interim capacity.
I see.
So it's going to be her last week next week. I would like to move forward with interviewing the internal candidate.
Paul.
Have a good night.
Sorry.
As soon as possible, with the hopes of kind of expediting this for approval of the select board for Tuesday evening.
Yep.
At that point, we'd still have to probably do an emergency hire of the person for 2 weeks, and then final approvals by the PQB, and then select board again. But this is just to have some continuation of leadership in the Council on Aging if that person does, is the best person. So, I know that we had the directive before, but to do the internal candidate, I'm not sure if we really need to do a timeline and redo the job description right now and create a posting and post it at MCOA. Really essentially just having a very small group, probably myself, Janet, Ted Palmer, who is the new COA director, COA board chair, sorry. Francine? Francine?
COA.
Yep.
Friends of the COA.
Friends of the COA, and there was one other COA board member that was interested too. I believe it was the doctor.
Perhaps, yeah.
And then hopefully one of the select board members.
What depends on the time of day, I guess.
Just
Really.
to get.
You said Tuesday.
Probably later Tuesday. The person's going to be available. And if the interview goes well, then this small group could recommend action by the select board to take the next steps. If not, then we would move forward with doing a nationwide search for this next director. So putting on the MCOA and MMA and all the other advertisements.
So this would not be an interim, this would be an emergency that might be permanent?
Yeah, just time-wise, I mean, because we wouldn't be able to get it by the PQB before Tuesday night, come to an agreement with salary.
So when are they meeting?
They're meeting later next week. So they would have to approve the emergency, then it would go back to the select board for approval of the emergency hire and permanent.
So you're looking for somebody from select board to join the committee?
Yeah, if this is okay.
Any volunteers?
What time again? It's Tuesday late. I don't know. I need to know like a time.
It would be like Tuesday afternoon to evening, early evening, before the select board meeting, obviously.
I don't know. I may be able to join them, but I cannot commit to those times.
Okay.
I sign a warrant every Tuesday, and that's a variable time requirement, so I'll be available around that.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So if that's okay to do like the small committee approach?
All right, so then, all those in favor of Stephen being the appointed select board person to be on the interview
Second?
group? Okay, I think, I
I
have a motion, or second?
I thought you were making the
I'll
motion.
make a motion, sure.
Oh.
I'll make a motion to be the appointed person.
And I second it?
Second, okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, Palmer, aye, Fowles, aye.
Great.
Johnson and LaValle, aye. All right,
Yeah.
very good. Okay, so be it.
That's it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Okay. So
Thank
that
you,
was-
Cindy.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
Go back to
Is that what you're
watching
asking?
the Aurora Borealis.
Motion to adjourn. Could I have a second?
Second.
All right, we are adjourned at 8:59. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cindy.
That was a lot of work.
Everybody.
Pulling it all together.